I'm Don Quattlebaum. I was born in Florence and lived there until I went to Clemson. And when I went to Clemson, my parents moved down here to the Plantersville area. And so I've had deep roots here. My parents owned a Rundle plantation since I was 2 years old. So I spent weekends and summers here and just love this area. We found out that the rice grows really well in these soils. These are special soils for rice. And so we decided to try to grow the heirloom varieties of Carolina Gold, the Santee Gold now and Charleston Gold to begin with. And it makes the most fantastic rice in these soils that you've ever had. Every year we buy certified seed. We've been buying it up until this year from the Texas Rice Improvement Association, and they've closed down. So now we're buying it from Schaffner Seed in Arkansas, and also the Dale Bumpers Rice Institute has certified seed as well. So in order to make sure that we don't have any crossbreeding or to make sure that the varieties are pure, we use those certified seed every year. We could replant what we have, but we don't do that. The slaves helped carve the rice fields out of the river. And so all of these are alluvial soils, and they're full of peat because when you have peat, that means that the decomposition is not complete. And with water always on the fields, it never did fully decompose. And so this peat is there. And peat, as every gardener knows, is wonderful for things. It adds a lot of flavor. There are a lot of minerals here. And it just is the perfect soil for rice. In addition to that, we're able to use the river water through the trunk system to flood the fields and not have to use groundwater. So it's also, more environmentally safe, and there are places in Arkansas that are running out of groundwater. So it's overall, it's just a perfect spot for it. Well, we try to plant as early as possible. Rice is a 120-day crop. So if we could plant in March, then we could harvest before all the hurricanes. It's usually too wet, and it's usually towards the end of April when we get it in, but we still can avoid the September and October hurricanes if we can get it in early enough for that. I'll back up just a minute. One of the main reasons that rice was stopped in this area, they continued to grow rice until the early 1900s here. And at that point, Elizabeth Austin Pringle was working with freed slaves, either as hired help or as sharecrop. So she was able to keep it going. But in the early 1900s, there was a series of hurricanes that damaged the dike system, and the local owners were unable to repair those, didn't have the funds. So it stopped, and the reason they moved it onto upland fields was because it was so much easier to work. You could the mechanized machines had come along and they were able to work on these upland fields, whereas these fields are so muddy and peaty that they would sink in. So we worried about that aspect. And I searched for a long time to find a small harvester like they would use in Japan or China or India. And almost everything that I found was impossible to import because they had engines that were not EPA approved. I finally found in India a small harvester that hooked onto a John Deere tractor, which we already had. So we were able to import it because it didn't have an engine. And we used that for the first couple of years. We ended up putting pumps inside the rice fields, pumping water out, not pumping water in, but out. So that gets the level inside even lower and allows it to get dry enough for us to put heavy equipment on. So now we can plant with the heavy tractors and we can harvest with a large combine. So after during the months that it's growing, we'll monitor it. One of our biggest issues is the red-winged blackbird. I think we lost about 30% of our crop last year to them. And we've tried everything from propane cannons to balloons to lasers to sprays that they use in vineyards. And the issue is, us being the only rice grower in the area, all the birds congregate on us, and they love rice better than anything. So that's our big issue, that, and of course we have to watch for insects and other things and take care of the rice as it's growing. When it's ready to harvest, we'll drain the fields again and give it about 3 weeks to dry out and fully get the rice mature enough to harvest. You don't want it too dry to harvest because it will break up in processing. But if you don't have it dry enough, then it will mold. So you have to get it right in the sweet spot, which is 18 to 20% moisture. And from the fields, we go directly into drying bins, which have perforated floors and heat and fans with an automatic system that knows the dryness of the rice and will cut on the fans or the heat, whatever's needed. And then you get it down to an optimal about 12 to 14% moisture content. And at that point, we take it out of the drying bins and we'll put it in super sacks, which will hold about 2,000 pounds. And the super sacks will go inside another bag, a hermetically sealed bag, that we treat with CO2. And that prevents any insects from growing in it. They can't live in CO2. And as long as it's dry enough, it prevents mold, because mold also needs oxygen. So that's the way we preserve the rice, and that way we can keep it preserved like that until we need it. So the fresher the rice is, the better, and so we only process it as needed. So we'll take it out of those bags and run it through our brand new rice mill and process it and bag it. Not very long. You know, we'll process enough to stay ahead a little bit. We deliver in our own van or to a distributor. And so we'll keep enough to keep us going for a month or so. But when we start getting low, we'll process some more and put it in bags. Well, we have small bags that are retail, either 20 ounce or 24 ounce bags, and we either deliver those to stores or like the Rice Museum or local stores. We also have a distributor that distributes to Lowe's Foods and other grocery stores. And we also have large 12.5 pound bags that we sell to restaurants, food service. Well, the original rice that made South Carolina famous was Carolina Gold. And it has this wonderful mouthfeel and culinary qualities to it that's just unmatched. And you combine that with the soils here, the terroir, if you will, and it just makes for perfect rice. However, Charleston Gold is a tall rice, easily lodged with winds. So lodged means if the winds come, it'll blow the rice over in the field and it gets damaged and you can't harvest it. It's also susceptible to some of the rice diseases. So in about 2010, they came out with Charleston Gold. And this is a collaboration between a professor at Clemson and someone in the Philippines and Anna McClung with the Dale Bumpers Rice Institute. And what they did was, over many years, just like other rices have been changed through history, they don't use any GMO, they're not changing any genetics or anything like that. What they do is they will plant two rices close together, let them cross-pollinate. They will pick out what they find, what they're looking for, best quality, and then take those and replant them the next year and take the best. And it takes a process of about 10 to 15 years to get what you're looking for. And Charleston Gold is Carolina Gold crossed with the aromatic Asian rice. So it has that wonderful aromatics like jasmine and basmati, but it maintains that Carolina Gold mouthfeel and cookability. So that was the first rice that we started growing, and it's been wonderfully received. Then just this year, we had our first harvest of Santee Gold. And Santee Gold was just approved as a new variety by USDA last year. And so this is the first commercial harvest for anyone. And it was based on the lost long gold. Long gold was a prized variety of Carolina gold that was discovered in the early 1850s, I think at Brookgreen. And the manager there noticed that there were some plants that had an extra long grain. And so he saved those back, and again, over several years, planted and saved the long grains over and over for years until he had enough to plant a whole field. And this, they called it long gold, and it won 2 international competitions as the best rice in the world. And it was very close, of course, to the Civil War at that time, and it was lost to history. So Dr. Anna McClung at Dale Bumpers worked with Carolina Gold and another very long grain variety, Presidio, and did the same thing over 14 years. She worked, and every year they had culinary trials. They wanted to maintain everything that was great about the Carolina Gold, but have a little bit longer grain, have it where it was shorter so it wouldn't lodge as easily, and was more immune to some of the rice diseases. And so the Santee Gold does not have aromatics, and so it'll give you the real Carolina Gold flavor. Yes. Down south of Charleston, Turnbridge Plantation is growing some rice. I think they're growing Carolina Gold, and they may have started Santee Gold this year as well. But the grower there, I think sells his to Anson Mills in Columbia. And Campbell Cox in Darlington with Carolina Plantation has his own fields and grows, I'm not sure what varieties he's growing there now. But we are the only one in the state that are growing on historic rice fields that have everything on site, from planting to harvesting to drying to processing to bagging, everything. So we're the only ones doing that.
And how large a staff are you working with here?
We have 4 employees. We have a fully automated rice mill, which again I think is the largest in the state now. I'm not sure. I haven't seen all the others, but there are 3 others I think in the state. But it's fully automated, so it doesn't take a lot of labor. Here in January, of course, it's duck season, and we have that going on. We're bagging some of the new crop. We just last week had our inspection from the Department of Agriculture and got our approval to start processing. So normally we would have started this earlier. If we harvest in September, we'd normally start bagging in October or November, but we had to wait until we got approval to do so. So we're busy doing a lot of that right at the moment. Well, right now we're growing 90 acres of rice each year, which allows us to rotate the crops because we've got over 250 acres of rice fields. But it's not quite as necessary to rotate in this region because we're not taking all the nutrients out of the soil. Using the river water as our irrigation, it brings in sediment and silt, and so it kind of replenishes itself, unlike most upland fields. So, of course, hundreds of years ago, they never rotated and they never let lands lie fallow. They put the rice in every year and never had any issues. But I think that makes it kind of unique here, but we're still rotating to some extent just to do some tests. We're working with Clemson on some tests and making sure we're doing the best practices. Hayden and I lost our son Andy in 2019. And Hayden's family had owned the bottling plant for Pepsi in Conway. And when they sold that, we were fortunate enough to be able to start a foundation to honor our son and the things that he cared about. We have already done quite a few things. We've built a building at Clemson on the lake, the Don Quattlebaum Outdoor Education Center, which all the students just lovingly call Andy's. And it's a great place for them to hang out and have some recreation. We have the Don Quattlebaum Distinguished Chair of Infectious Disease at North Carolina State Veterinary School, and the current holder of that chair is a wonderful man, Dr. Adam Birkenhauer, who is working on tick-borne diseases, which affects not only animals but humans as well, things like Lyme disease. So it's very worthwhile. We support Sella Care Farm in Arizona, which has been a great help to us. It's a place where people with traumatic grief can go and and get help that's not really available many places in the country. Just this past weekend, we partnered with South Carolina Waterfowl Association and many of the landowners in the county to have the Don Quattlebaum warrior hunt. And so we had veterans come and they hunted at all of the properties from the Santee Delta all the way up here to the PD. And they had a wonderful time, and we had an auction and raised money for Smoky Mountain service dogs. And they provide service dogs to veterans at no cost to the veterans. And so there was a few years back, there was a similar type warrior hunt down at Annandale Plantation. And we hosted a couple of the veterans, and Andy became very close friends with them. And it was one of his favorite events ever. And so those two veterans that he was friends with were co-chairmen of this event. And it was something that I know he would have loved. And we raised about $80,000 for our charities. And one of the early owners was Joel Poinsett, and he was Secretary of War under Martin Van Buren, was also a botanist, the poinsettia of plants named after him, and he had Andrew Jackson Downing, a famous landscape architect from DC, who I think did the Smithsonian and the White House, come here to do the landscaping. And so there were great gardens here and exotic trees. I think one of the trees in the front yard is from South America. Most of the garden's gone. A lot of the azaleas are still here, but he really enjoyed it here. And a later owner was Elizabeth Alston Pringle, who wrote Woman Rice Planter. She was born at Shakora Wood, daughter of Governor Robert Alston, and she married John Julius Pringle, whose parents owned this place. And shortly after the Civil War, she and her mother came here to visit Mrs. Pringle and her son John Julius. They had both lost their husbands, and that's where they first met, and they were married shortly thereafter, and she lived a wonderful life here, but it was way too short. John Julius Pringle died, and they had no children, and so she carried on running this place as a widow, and after her mother died, she took over running Shakora Wood as well, and so she was running both of these places as a widow after the Civil War. Just an amazing woman to be able to pull all of this off, and she continued to grow rice and write articles for newspapers and anything she could do to keep it going. One of the things that excites me as a possibility, and we've talked with people at Clemson about it and others, is that a lot of these rice fields are still intact. And with our new mill, we have a lot of excess capacity. If, we could talk other landowners into growing some rice, we could help with the processing and try to really get it going again. The Carolina Gold Rice Foundation is doing a great job with trying to build the brand back up so that people really know what's going on with Carolina Gold and the varieties. But the historic rice fields really add that special terroir to it. And so I hope we can get more going. One of the great things about it is rice is a grass, and so it will grow a second crop. The first crop takes 120 days, but the second crop only takes 60 days because you cut it about a foot high. And so it's already started, and it'll grow out the second crop. Now the second crop doesn't yield as much, and sometimes the quality's not as good. But if you can harvest early enough, grow that second crop, you have the second crop for the ducks. And so for all of the landowners that want to shoot ducks, that's a win-win.